Everyone tells you the same thing. Renting is throwing money away, and buying a house is the smart move. But what if that advice is wrong for millions of people? And nobody ever runs the actual numbers. Today, we're breaking down the real math behind renting versus buying. No assumptions, just numbers. This isn't about which one is morally better. It's about which one actually builds more wealth. Because for a huge chunk of the population, the always buy rule can quietly drain your savings. Let's start with where this advice even came from and why it doesn't fit today's world. Back then, homes were cheap, mortgages were simple, and people stayed in one job for decades. Today, home prices have exploded, careers change constantly, and the math looks completely different. So the question isn't, is buying good? It's, is buying good for you right now with these numbers? To answer that, we need to look past the emotional stuff and into the real cost of owning a home. Because owning a home costs a lot more than just the mortgage payment, way more than most people realize. Property taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance, they all add up quietly in the background. On average, homeowners spend 1 to 2% of their home's value every single year just on upkeep. On a $400,000 home, that's $4,000 to $8,000 a year before a single mortgage payment. And that's just the beginning of the hidden costs nobody puts in the brochure. Let's talk about the down payment first, because that chunk of cash isn't just saved, it's locked up. A 20% down payment on that same home is $80,000 gone from your liquid savings. That money could have been invested instead, and that's called opportunity cost. And it's often ignored. If that $80,000 sat in the stock market instead, growing at historical averages, it could compound significantly. Then there's closing costs, usually 2 to 5% of the home price, paid just to complete the purchase. On our example home, that's another $8,000 to $20,000, gone before you even move in. Now, add mortgage interest, especially in the early years, when most of your payment goes to the bank, not your equity. In the first 5 years of a 30-year mortgage, you might build far less equity than people assume. Then there's maintenance, roofs, water heaters, plumbing, appliances, things that quietly break at the worst possible time. Homeowners insurance is also higher than renters insurance because you're covering the entire structure, not just your belongings. And in many places, property taxes go up over time, sometimes faster than your income does. None of these costs build equity. They just keep the house standing, and they never stop. Meanwhile, renters skip almost all of this. No repairs, no property tax, no surprise plumbing bill. That's the part of the myth nobody mentions. Renting isn't wasting money, it's paying for flexibility and simplicity. But renters do miss out on one major thing. They don't build equity in a property at all. So the real comparison isn't renting versus buying. It's renting and investing the difference versus buying and building equity. That distinction changes the entire conversation. And it's the piece almost every just buy a house argument leaves out. To compare them fairly, we need to look at what happens to the money in both scenarios over the same years. So let's build a simple, realistic example. No extreme assumptions, just typical numbers. Imagine two people, same income, same city, same starting savings. One buys a home, one rents and invests. Person. One buys a $400,000 home with 20% down and a 30-year mortgage at a typical rate. Person 2 rents a similar home for $1,800 a month and invests the $80,000 down payment instead. Every month, person 2 also invests whatever extra cash they have compared to the homeowner's total costs. This is the fairest way to compare them. Same starting point, same monthly cash flow, different paths. Now, let's fast forward 10 years and see where each of them actually ends up. For the homeowner, home values historically appreciate around 3 to 4% a year on average. After 10 years, that home might be worth roughly $570,000, a solid gain on paper. But the mortgage isn't paid off yet, so the real number to look at is equity, not the home's total value. After 10 years of payments, the homeowner might have built around $150,000 to $180,000 in equity. That's real, meaningful wealth, but it came with a decade of taxes, repairs, interest, and insurance payments too. Now, let's check on the renter, who put that same $80,000 into the market 10 years ago. At a historical average return of around 7% a year after inflation, that money could roughly double. And remember, the renter was also investing the monthly difference between renting and the homeowner's full costs. Even a modest monthly difference, invested consistently for 10 years, adds up to a meaningful extra sum. When you add both together, the renter's portfolio can end up surprisingly close to, or even ahead of, the homeowner's equity. This is the part that shocks people, because it goes against everything they've been told their whole life. The outcome isn't buying wins or renting wins. It depends entirely on the numbers in your specific market. That's where a simple tool comes in, the price to rent ratio, which shows which option tends to make more sense locally. You take the home's price and divide it by how much a year of renting that same home would cost. A ratio under 15 usually favors buying. A ratio over 20 usually favors renting and investing instead. In cheaper markets, buying often wins clearly. In expensive cities, renting and investing can come out ahead. That's why the same advice, always buy, can be excellent in one city and terrible in another. That's also why so many financially savvy people in expensive cities choose to rent on purpose. They're not being irresponsible. They're doing the math and putting their money where it grows faster, but the math only works if the renter actually invests the difference. And that's the part most people skip. If you rent but spend the savings instead of investing it, you lose the entire advantage of renting. That's the real trap. Not renting itself, but failing to actually build wealth with the money you saved. So, the rent versus buy decision isn't really about housing, it's about discipline and where your money is working hardest. Now, let's look at a real example with actual numbers so you can see exactly how this plays out. Meet Sarah, who bought a home, and Alex, who rented and invested, same city, same starting income. Sarah buys a $350,000 condo with 20% down, a 6% mortgage rate, and a 30-year term. Her monthly payment, including taxes and insurance, comes out to roughly $2,400 a month. Alex rents a similar condo nearby for $2,000 a month and invests the $70,000 down payment right away. Since Alex's rent is $400 cheaper each month, he invests that difference too, every single month. Over 10 years, Sarah pays down her mortgage while her condo slowly appreciates in value. Alex's portfolio grows through both the initial investment and 10 years of monthly contributions. After 10 years, Sarah's condo is worth around $470,000, with about $220,000 still owed. That puts Sarah's real equity at roughly $250,000, a strong result from a decade of ownership. Alex's portfolio, growing at a historical 7% average, reaches somewhere around $230,000 to $260,000. In this scenario, the two outcomes land remarkably close together, despite completely different paths. But there's a key difference. Alex's money is liquid. He can access it anytime without selling a home. Sarah's wealth is locked inside her condo. To access it, she'd need to sell or take on more debt. That liquidity difference matters a lot if either of them needs cash quickly for an emergency or an opportunity. On the other hand, Sarah has something Alex doesn't: a predictable payment that never increases with rent hikes. If rent prices rise faster than expected, Alex's monthly investing amount could shrink, changing his results significantly. This is why the rent versus buy math isn't a one-time calculation. It depends on your local market over time. It also depends on how long you actually plan to stay in one place. Buying usually only pays off if you stay long enough to cover closing costs and build meaningful equity. Most experts estimate that break-even point lands somewhere between 4 and 7 years in the same home. If you sell before that point, transaction costs alone can wipe out most of your equity gains. So if your job or lifestyle involves moving every couple of years, renting often makes far more financial sense. But if you're planning to stay put for a decade or more, buying starts to look a lot stronger. There's no universal winner here. The right answer depends entirely on your timeline, your market, and your habits, which brings us to the part of this debate that has nothing to do with math at all. The psychological pressure that pushes so many people toward buying, even when the numbers don't support it. For generations, owning a home has been treated as the ultimate marker of adulthood and success. Family, friends, and social media constantly reinforce the idea that renting means you're falling behind. That pressure can push people into buying before they're financially ready, just to avoid feeling judged. There's also a fear of missing out on rising prices, the worry that waiting means being priced out forever. This fear has driven plenty of buyers to stretch their budgets far beyond what's actually comfortable. When housing costs eat up too much income, it leaves little room for saving, investing, or handling emergencies. A common rule of thumb is keeping total housing costs under 30% of your take-home income. Going well beyond that number is often where the real financial stress begins, regardless of home appreciation. On the flip side, renting carries its own social stigma, even when it's the financially smarter choice. But financial decisions made to satisfy other people's expectations rarely lead to the best long-term outcomes. The healthiest approach is treating this like the financial decision it actually is, not a status symbol. That means running your own numbers for your own city, your own timeline, and your own income. It also means being honest about whether you'd actually invest the difference if you chose to rent. If you know you wouldn't invest consistently, owning a home can act as a kind of forced savings plan. That's a real, valid reason to buy, even if the pure math slightly favors renting instead. So, let's look honestly at when buying a home actually makes the strongest financial sense. First, when you plan to stay in one place for many years, giving equity time to build significantly. Second, when your local price-to-rent ratio is low, meaning homes are relatively cheap compared to rent. Third, when you can comfortably afford the payment without stretching your budget past that 30% guideline. Fourth, when you value stability, knowing your payment won't suddenly jump the way rent sometimes can. A fixed-rate mortgage locks in your major housing costs for decades, which can be powerful during high inflation. Fifth, when you want a space you can fully customize, renovate, paint, or modify without asking permission. And sixth, when owning provides emotional and psychological value that genuinely matters to your quality of life. That value is real, even though it doesn't show up directly in a spreadsheet. Money isn't the only thing that matters in a housing decision, and that's worth acknowledging honestly. But it's important to separate genuine value from social pressure disguised as personal preference. Ask yourself honestly, do I want this home? Or do I just feel like I'm supposed to want it? If the answer is genuine desire and the numbers are workable, buying can absolutely be the right move. The mistake isn't buying a home. It's buying one without ever checking whether the numbers actually make sense. Now, let's flip it around and look at when renting and investing tends to come out ahead instead. First, when you're likely to move within the next few years for work, relationships, or lifestyle changes. Moving often means you'll never reach the break-even point where buying costs actually pay off. Second, when your local price-to-rent ratio is high, meaning homes are expensive relative to renting the same space. In many major cities, this ratio strongly favors renting and investing the difference instead. Third, when you value flexibility more than stability, the freedom to relocate without selling a property first. Fourth, when you're disciplined enough to actually invest the money you save by not owning. Automating those investments removes the temptation to spend the difference instead of growing it. Fifth, when you'd rather avoid the unpredictable costs and responsibilities that come with owning property. There's real peace of mind in knowing a broken water heater isn't your financial responsibility. In the end, renting isn't giving up on wealth, it's simply choosing a different, equally valid path to build it. So the truth nobody tells you is this: there's no universally correct answer between renting and buying. The right choice depends on your city, your timeline, your discipline, and what you actually value in life. Run your own numbers, check your local price to rent ratio, and be honest about whether you truly invest the difference. This video is for education only, not personal financial advice. Always consider your own full situation. Now you know the real math behind renting versus buying. The choice and the numbers are yours to run.